I should go ahead and get started. Today, we are fortunate to have Hap Garritt, who's the information manager from Plum Island LTER, and Jim Laundre, who is the IM at the Arctic LTER, as our speakers. And they're going to talk about the Drupal Ecological Information Management System, which is otherwise known as DEIMS. And I decided to give you a brief history of DEIMS before Hap and Jim take the floor, because this is the first coordinated effort that I'm aware of where LTR sites got together and collaborated to create a tool that we could all use. And I thought that it might be of interest to you to know how this project evolved, because it might serve as a model for later collaborations that we might do as part of EDI. So DEIMS came about starting in 2009. There was a gentleman at the LTR network office named Marshall White, and he was learning Drupal, and he saw an opportunity to use it to create a form-based metadata editor from which EML could be generated. He also envisioned Drupal as a website that could be used to manage most LTR information management products, including publications and data sets and documents and photos, all in a really coordinated, integrated way. So DEIMS was a metadata editor and a framework for managing most LTR information management products. And that's what Marshall's vision was. And he was a very smart guy. So Marshall built the DEIMS prototype. And at the same time, he interested Inigo San-Gil, who was a developer at the network office at the time, in using the system as a metadata editor. So Marshall and Inigo then interested me. I was at the Seviet at the time, and Ada at Lukio LTR in being the guinea pigs for this project. So by 2010, we had the first DEIMS installed. It was great. It worked wonderfully. And so shortly thereafter, Hap and Jim joined us as early adopters of DEIMS. And let's see, during that period, somehow we pooled some supplemental funds to support a PHP developer at Woods Hole who created the first module that generated EML from DEIMS. So we had kind of a shoestring budget when we first started to collaborate. And so DEIMS in Drupal 6 was wonderful, but we knew that we were going to have to migrate to Drupal 7 because there were a lot more capabilities in Drupal 7. Also, we knew that there wouldn't be security patches for Drupal 6 forever. So we recognized this was going to be a huge project. And so 3 LTR sites, Sevieta, North Temperate Lakes, and Lukio, decided to pool our NSF information management supplement funds so that we could hire a developer to actually to write the scripts to move information from D6 to Drupal 7, and also to create some of those new functions that we wanted. So we had $140,000 to do that from just our supplement funds. NSF used to give supplement funds usually on an annual basis for information management to LTR sites. And then we also got some money from the America Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds that went to the LTR network office. So we had a decent budget for this. So we worked with Palantir for quite some time, and we got what we needed from them. And then Inigo has continued to do some development on DEIMS since that time. So as of now, all the original sites have migrated to Drupal 7, and Kanza and McMurdo are now also DEIMS sites. So there are 8 LTR sites actually that are using DEIMS. And they're the Sevieta, Lukio, North Temperate Lakes, Jornada, Arctic, Plum Island, Kanza, and McMurdo. So Hap and Jim will be introducing you to some of the features of DEIMS. And if there's time and interest after that, Corinna said that she would introduce the Data Explorer, which was a piece of DEIMS that was developed specifically for North Temperate Lakes, but it's also used at other sites as well now. So Hap and Jim, I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Okay, we thought we'd go through, start with showing what both Hap and I do for a workflow from the investigator all the way to Pasta. DEIMS being the intermediate website, from there going to Pasta. So we're going to share screen. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay. So just to go over, I'm just going to mention what DEIMS is, well, not so much what DEIMS is actually, what where Drupal sits in the web space. And then I'm going to show how we get our metadata from the investigator using an Excel template. And then Hap's going to go over how to enter it into the DEIMS website. When we had DEIMS 6, we had the developer that Kristen mentioned come up with a system for going from a common delimited files into DEIMS 6. That's currently in DEIMS 7, doesn't work quite right. I still have hope for that, but that's not how we're doing it right now. Oops. And then Hap's going to show how to get data into the DEIMS contents. And then just go over how in Drupal you can get the various views of the data set, creating data catalogs, and how you can also find data in DEIMS using what Drupal calls taxonomy, which is really a vocabulary term. There's several vocabularies or multiple categories you can use in a Drupal site. We have keywords, LTR keywords, local keywords. I use species as a keyword taxonomy. And then we have projects. So we'll go through that. Drupal is a content management software, and there's 3 big ones out there right now, or 3 well-used ones, and they're all free. There used to be more that were paid for, but these seems to have taken over. WordPress is by far the largest share. It's very beginner friendly, so I think that's why it's used. If you want to get complicated, then you start moving down to either Joomla or Drupal. Drupal required coding skills, so it's a very coding intense learning experience. As such, you can do a lot more with it, but I think it's coming down to where there's several big Drupal shops and clients come to them to do their coding. As you can see here, there's not a lot of sites that use Drupal, but there are some very important sites that do. So for us, we early on went from a Word template to an Excel template, following Florida's lead in that, I'm missing her name now, Kristen's predecessor. Linda helped develop with using Perl scripts and an Excel sheet going into creating the websites and then EML. So then I'll show you the file, an Excel template, but basically it gets sent to me or Hap. We check for obvious omissions and errors. And I've developed an Excel macro to do several checkings. It finds keywords, whether they're LTR or local Arctic. I've gone through a lot of the keywords that investigators give me and then found the most preferred ones. And if they're place names and other things that are not in the LTR preferred catalog, then we put them in the local Arctic keyword system. Units, it has another lookup table that converts whatever the investigators like to use into the camel script type accepted style. And date formats, it checks that they're the same between what they say on metadata and the data. And all of these checks get added after I find problems when trying to upload it into Pasta. And it does other basic checking of, are the same, are the number of metadata or the variable names in the metadata same as the data, or is the data columns the same? Do they have a lot of blank columns on the ends? Are there non-numeric values in them, except for what's declared as missing codes? And research sites, there we try to use this, the accepted name in Latin long of research sites. And then once that's set, we go back and forth. And then an ID is assigned and a CSV file is saved. And then Hap will take you on to putting it into an LTER DEIMS site. Yeah, so in Excel, I won't show you a blank one, but basically, this is what I get sometimes from an investigator. I've broken the metadata down into a one sheet where it has, I put comments in it to give the investigators ideas of what should be there, how long, what, when, and where. Investigators, and they didn't fill that out, doesn't matter because I do that. Sites, I've gone ahead and put a section in there for validating. They can select this site's name. You can click on this link, will take you to Google Map to see whether you are exactly where you think you are. And here's a case where they didn't really follow the instructions. They didn't put the species taxonomy, the species in a acceptable format. So I sent it back and asked them to do that. Keywords, methods, and then with the variables, make sure the variables are the same as the variables across the top. And then I broke it down to where they just get to choose whether it's a text, number, or date time. And the macro decides whether there's only a few instances like Celsius that has to be a different EML variable. And then units, again, have a little lookup section for them. So they can either put in a new one or put in one that's already defined. And then coding, date format. So once I'm happy with, or I run the macro, and if it doesn't find anything, it gets assigned an ID, a year it's published, and where it's going to be on the website. I don't know if that'll work. Update data. Okay, anyway. And so that's the web form that we get. And then Hap's going to show you this where you want to be? The actual websites.
So basically, as Jim said, we that Excel template is really important as the metadata that we get from researchers and something that we check to make sure that it is acceptable, and the macro runs and all those sorts of checks, and it does some of the metadata checks that Pasta would then require in order for it to actually go into Pasta well. So once we had that, you know, back in the early days when it was Drupal 6, there was a module, an Excel to DEIMS module that actually took that that Excel spreadsheet and would put it into Drupal. But now that we're in Drupal 7, we don't have that. That hasn't been developed yet to quite get there. So we basically take that Excel spreadsheet that is as good as it possibly can be with metadata, and we do manual entry. So the Plum Island site just went public recently, and this is an example. Sorry?
The 7 site.
The 7 site, yeah. Just went public recently, and this is an example of the home page. And what I want to do is to go through within this, where we would actually start inputting that metadata that's in the Excel spreadsheet to create a data set. So this is an example when you sign, Drupal has different permission levels. So the previous page here is an example of what the public would see. However, when you sign in as an administrator, you then get into some different looking menu systems across the top here that allow you to do some behind the scenes work as far as, say, metadata entry. And in this particular one, this is a blank form that's located within the content where you say you want to add content. And in this particular case, we want to add content that's associated with, oops, sorry about this, it's going a little bit fast for me. Content that's associated with data sets. So this is a blank form that has, from your title, your data set ID, that would be your package ID. Short name might be a file name, abstract, basic information, the purpose, additional information that you want to have in there, maintenance. And then as you go across these various different tabs here, you can enter other information about the actual data source that you have, personnel, methods, taxonomy, the temporal timeframes of when the data was published or when the data set started and finished, and then other information about related information. So that's an example of a blank form that you might start with.
You want to show them the data source just to show them, or just click what you can do if it's blank.
Yeah, so within here, so here you can add a data source here, and there would be the name of your data source, the title of it, description, and then within the data source you've got variables, temporal coverage, methods associated with it, and other related information. Here you would actually browse and upload the CSV file that would be associated with that, that data source. Personnel, you have a variety of different personnel types you can put in there, the owner creator, contact information, metadata provider, publisher, methods, just basically description of your methods, quality assurance, instrumentation that may be associated with particular data sets.
So data source would be similar to an entity, I believe. Yeah, an entity in EML.
Okay.
Would you mind showing an upload of a file and how it parses out the variables for you?
Yeah, what I'm going to show here
Okay.
next is actually a data set that's filled out, if that's helpful, just to see initially what kinds of information is in there. And so basically we sort of saw some of that earlier there, but in a blank form. Personnel here, you'd have different content types within personnel. So in this instance here, we have Ann Giblin as a person, Chuck Hopkinson as a person, LTER as an organization as far as being an owner creator. And then for our particular site, the contact, metadata provider, and publisher stays at Plum Island Ecosystems. Methods, I guess that's kind of straightforward. Taxonomy. So taxonomy is not species taxonomy. Drupal uses this term taxonomy to refer to sort of vocabularies that can be used in a tagging system. So for Plum Island, we have the core areas that are associated with the LTER. So we can tag individual data sets with the corresponding core areas. We also have a tagging system for PI research areas, different research topics that are of interest to Plum Island. We have a GIS section where you can tag GIS data sets depending upon certain GIS type terms. There's another GIS section where you can get into tagging according to, say, towns where the GIS has been developed and whatnot. And then you get into the keywords. And our keyword list still needs some work. It's kind of it's a mix between the LTER vocabulary and Plum Island vocabulary, all sort of dumped together. They're not separated out. But this gives the user the option of scrolling down through all of these different ones and picking out which ones they seem to be appropriate for their particular data set. And at the very bottom, after you scroll through this extensive list, you can see the corresponding ones that you've clicked on. And then these can be used as search terms or tagging terms for looking at the data later on in views on the website that you end up developing. Within this, there's also research site information. And that goes under the related information. You can put in related links to a particular data set. And then you can also tag, have publications that are associated with that data set be put in here so that then when you're viewing a data set later on, you can see the corresponding publications that are associated with it, and then related sites also. So a user coming along would be like, all right, how do I even know what site to put in there initially? You've got your Excel spreadsheet, but then it's like, well, maybe I'd like to know that there's something already in the system. So once a lot of your data and metadata has gone in there, there is a memory in the system. So in a blank space, I could start typing a name of something, and what should pop up is some other names of those research sites that would be potential best guesses for what you might want to put in there. So that's helpful in actually filling out the forms. As we all know, that we love filling out forms, so it's nice to have some help go along the way. Let's see. And so, Kristen, you said, what did you want me to try to show?
The data source and how you, if when you upload a file, it will parse
Yeah.
the variable names for you.
Okay. So let's see here. I am going to get into, I think there was one that was here already. So this is an example of a data source that's already there. And if we get into editing this actually may not be showing what you want to see. And sorry, this is all live right now. Some of this may need to be faster than it actually is. And actually, I am going to go back to a different one here. And I'm going to go into editing a data source here. And so here, if I would like to, I can add in a data source name here. Let's see, what is this? This is an actual, yeah, this is a blank one. So what you need to put in is some sort of title. Doesn't really matter at this point. Dataset ID doesn't matter right now. I might want a number. Data source name could be, that doesn't really matter either. And here's where you would browse to a file. And let's see, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to attach. I think I can just go to this one here, right? Yeah, just use that. Okay, and just say attach here, right? Is it yeah. Okay, so and then go to variables. Yep. So I just selected a file, and it's already been in the system, so it's already been uploaded. But then what you can do is you can go into the variables, and once that CSV has been uploaded in there, you can go in and parse the variable names that are basically the header that was in that CSV file. And we're hoping that this will work. And still waiting. Yeah, unfortunately, it's taking a little bit of time to do this.
One of the issues we have right now is that we just went to Ubuntu 16.04. And so some things are not working quite right. Oh, there it did. Just took a while.
Yep, so that took a little bit of time there. But basically, as we scroll down, we can see one of the variables was date, another one station current, another one station previous. And so it has basically taken its best guess using that header
it's not taking
information. Well, it's using that, but you still have to go in and then fill out some of the other information in here too to check to see that it's correct. So if you get down to,
there were things that were
so like
not
here,
fully baked by the time they ran out of money. This is one of them.
Yeah. So for example here, this is salinity, and it can't guess what a label is because we have limited information in that top header line. So, but that the information was in that top header line for that one particular column was sal. I know that that's salinity, so I would then go and fill out the rest of this and put in a label and call it salinity. And I know that it's not nominal information, so you would come over to this type area and then select physical quantity. And then this will develop a drop-down menu that has the units from LTR in it. And so then you would select the appropriate unit of measure that corresponds to that, maximum, minimum values, precision as you see fit for that particular information. So that's a way of taking a CSV file and populating your variables for your data source, but it still requires some editing after that on your own, but at least some of it is populated.
Yeah, I always felt like that was one of the really nice features of the second DEIMS.
Right, because otherwise, I mean, you can go in there and do it manually. But yeah.
What was the next? So you want to show them the research publications? You're getting.
I mean, so on the website, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see here. I gotta get back to the website here. So if we go back to, where are we at the top here? I gotta get into. So this is again the public view here. So we just went through some of the information about or the process of getting data in there. Another area of content that people want on their websites are publications. And Drupal has a module called Biblio that allows you to have your publications on the website, and you can import data from like EndNote or BibTeX files, and you can actually use DOIs to actually populate the bibliography of your website too. So that's kind of automated, and it's a really, really nice feature.
Just you want me to show the.
Yeah, next I guess you can get into some different views. So once your data is in there, you obviously want to be able to look at it in a variety of different manners. At least all the DEIMS websites that are out there now have different ways of looking at their data. And so Drupal allows you to do that through something called views.
And on the Arctic site, this is my view of a data set. I've reworked it so it shows somewhat what the EDI site does for, it gives a hot link to the actual DOI, shows you the people, you can see the keywords, taxonomy, Arctic, has a picture for sites, which are linked. And right now I just have the email there too. And then you can directly download the files here, or you can go to what Hap was showing as a data source, look at more information. But all the DEIMS sites have a slightly different way of displaying this. One of the nice things about DEIMS is the fact that things are tagged. If I want to see Laura Golf, her publications, all the data sets she's a principal investigator on, it comes up with a nice page. You can click on one of these. And if you wanted to look at some of the other keywords, vertebrates, the disadvantage, of course, you can quickly get lost into where you are. But there's probably not many data sets with that species. What else are we doing? Oh, the site. The is also hot linked. Shows you all the data sets that are associated with that site. And I could have put more in here. I have still developing, putting more information here. And then if you want EML, you can just click on the EML link. And in Drupal, it just is a different view that's generated, a display view. And then you can take this link, copy it. Where do you put that portal? Data portal.
There we go.
You can copy it, put it here, evaluate it, wait for it to come back from Pasta, see if you did a good job or not. And then when you are happy with it, you can upload it. What else?
You should see what our outline, what else we want to talk about there. Biblio, did that. And down here, maybe like getting into data catalog. Yeah. So another thing is that, so once you've got your data in there and you've got a view of your particular data set, you may want to try to figure out like, well, how am I going to find any data on this website? You know, it's sort of all about like, you know, data search and discovery, right? So if we get into, go on the Plum Island website here, and we go back to go under data here. There's different ways of creating views again for the particular catalog that you're of interest. And for the Plum Island side, I wanted a catalog that showed data by the particular research area, PI research areas that we had. And this is just it's a list, but it's a searchable list. So that right now, currently, this is the default is that it shows all of the data that's within DEIMS right now. But I could sort that by consumer data. And so you basically cull it down to data sets that are of more interest for you. I can also put in keywords to search that area by that. I can do by core areas. So here I could do consumer population dynamics, and that will drill down even further. But in this case, it's probably going to have, actually, it's even larger than that because some of those other population dynamics weren't consumers. It was probably plants or something like that. So that's one other way of doing searches. And then I have one where I can do it by research site also, because I may know a particular site that I'm interested in, and then find the data that's associated with it that way. And Jim is going to show you the power data search, which uses a faceted type approach, which is sort of similar to what I just did. But
my data landing is more of a traditional categorical, where I have, you know, our sections, and then we also have collaborating projects that use the Arctic LTER research plots, but funding are from different areas or different grants. But then there's the power research, which can be one of the, it's slow sometimes, but you can put in, let's say, soil. So right here you also have your what they call facets, where you can filter it by keywords, or you can choose what you want to, facets you want to have. By search by soil. And then it still is a pretty big list. But then you can go over here and say, well, I just want soil temperature. And you'll find, anyway, you find, again, that you can further drill down in there. And I also have search by projects, a map with all the data set, and then again, the categories of the what we traditionally divide our data into. And this takes a while, I think. And because we have collaborating projects with a lot of different interests, it comes up. So that takes a while to load.
Yeah. So the other aspect to this is, so Jim and I are both IMs, Kristen is IM, so people that have worked with DEIMS in the past have been IMs. And the intent early on was that DEIMS was supposed to be so user-friendly as far as the interfaces that we would be able to give permissions to others to actually enter a bunch of this metadata. For Plum Island, at this point, we're not doing that. I'm doing it all as an administrator. I found that there's aspects of Drupal that are just a little bit more difficult, and some of the metadata isn't often quite right. So we have yet to sort of implement giving others that permission level to start entering some of this data on their own. However, Drupal 7 or DEIMS does allow a process where you can have drafts that are in there that then have to get accepted by the IM or someone else to approve what's been going in there. So there's a process where you can't allow others to go enter data. It doesn't go in right away until there's some approval process, but it has that capability, should you be so inclined to trust others entering data.
Yeah, I mean, that's the end goal, is not to have just one way of entering the data, but to have users be able to upload data, put the relevant information in. But we're still developing the site to make sure everything's working right. So that's kind of the downside of DEIMS.
You never feel like you're done, and can just enter data. There's always more stuff going on, but that's probably true with any website. So.
Yeah, and to be fair, there are certain parts that are like adding ORCID ID or the the hash codes. They took me a while to figure out exactly where that should have been done, but once I figured it out, it was only 1 or 2 lines of code. So it's just not. I'm not familiar with everything, inner workings of Drupal. Even though I can read it, but it's puzzling sometimes where things are coming from.
Corinna, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I just want to come in to defend DEIMS here, because I don't think that's a problem of DEIMS. It's a problem of EML and the complication of our metadata, that you have trouble, and especially having trouble other people entering metadata. So even if you enter everything correctly in DEIMS, you can still run into problems when you try to upload the EML file into PASTA. So I really would blame EML rather than DEIMS. I mean, DEIMS is a fairly comfortable environment to enter data, but EML is just so complicated that it just takes a lot of experience, and a lot of experience on interpreting error messages and then knowing what to edit and what to do in your EML to actually get it into PASTA.
John?
Yeah, no, I was just going to move the problem even further down the line, is that if I could, the biggest issue that I tend to have is that the data itself is often ill-formed, sometimes in only a couple ways, sometimes in a lot of different ways. And so describing the data file as it is would be a disaster because because it doesn't have complete columns, because we've all seen sort of what bad things can happen out there. And that tends to be the biggest issue I have, because we also have a system that PIs can use forms to do things with, but generally speaking, it's safest if I do the first draft and let them, then make corrections and tweaks as needed, but not to do it, because usually I take one look at the data file and say, well, first we've got to correct these 5 things, and then we're ready to create metadata for it. Anyway, but this is not an unknown problem.
Well, it took the developers quite a long time to develop the module that was to generate EML. I think originally they thought they were just going to slap some tags on the content and that was going to be it. But Inigo went back and forth with them so many times to try and get that module to work correctly. And I think it's probably not as easy to add code to as we had asked for either, because we knew that there would be new requirements for EML, and we asked them to develop it in such a way we could get a student programmer to update it, and it's not nearly to that point. So
I mean, there are sections that are pretty easy.
okay.
It's just a web template. If you're familiar with web templates, then it's not. And PHP, it's pretty easy. It's the places where they had difficulty, where they had to actually sort of bypass some of the stuff and build code into it. That you have to figure out the logic behind it.
Are there other questions for Hap and Jim about DEIMS? John?
Yeah, I guess my question was a little bit in terms of where we are in terms of the Drupal 7 life cycle, because we had been a Drupal 6 site, and then by the time we were done with Drupal 6, they were already coming out with Drupal 8, and but at the same time, Drupal 8 wasn't quite ready to do the things we needed done, and I was just sort of curious as to when you expect to need it again. The other thing I'd also like to find out is just, what is sort of a reasonable expectation in how much resources are needed in order to actually maintain and develop a DEIMS as a quality product there. And I'd like to, if you have any ideas on that, because obviously if we don't know what we need to ask for, we can't ask for it.
I don't know much about Drupal 8. I do know that there are several big modules that aren't in 8 right now. Feeds is one of them. There hasn't been one developed for 8 yet.
It's a bibliography.
Bibliography is not developed for 8. So there are some significant modules that aren't ready yet for 8. And I don't know, it's all one of the problems with open source is, whoever has their time and passion to do it, that's what gets done.
But you had mentioned earlier that there's a group who will continue to maintain Drupal 7 indefinitely, right?
Well, indefinitely means for a long time.
Yeah, Inigo had mentioned that last year because there was some concern about, okay, geez, 8's already out and it's been out for a while. What are they going to do with 7? Is 7 just going to go away like 6 is going to go away because of the security issues? And Inigo said, well, there's a group out there that is going to maintain 7, but there's no guarantee for how long that would occur. And 8 is, apparently it's not going to be that simple to go to 8. And again, especially if there's modules that we're currently using that we want to rely on still. The bibliography is a really, really nice module. To move to 8 and not have something like that would just not make any sense. So we're hoping, I guess everybody like, well, what are you going to do? And it's like, we're hoping that we'll be able to stay in 7 for a while and that this other group will help support that, knowing that the community at large out there really likes 7 and doesn't really want to go to 8 at this point. But at this point, it needs to be defined. I don't know how many years that is.
Yeah, and who knows? As everyone knows, in 5 or 6 years, what's going to be.
Yeah, no, I was just looking at I was trying to find it on the web, and basically get bug fix and security support until Drupal 8 becomes the long-term support version. And that is, it says, but Drupal 8 may have years of development ahead. So
That's good.
Yeah.
But anyway, in terms of the amount of resources, is this something where hiring a full-time programmer is needed, or do you need to hire Palantir once every 3 years? What do you think is sort of, what resources do you think would be needed to make Drupal be, to be all you want it to be?
Well, there is things that are lacking, and that would need a programmer. I'd really like to have a feeds input of taking whatever template you're using. I don't care if it's Excel and you go to a CSV file or whatever, that you could feed into it and that you can update and also create new ones. And So that's, I think, one of the major stumbling blocks. And I think the way they handle variables is slow and buggy in some ways. Sometimes you don't get the pop-ups for variables. And I think it's because, I mean, it uses a JScript to be able to populate them. And we've had issues with what version you're using too, whether things would be very slow and take forever or time out. So I would say you need to get to the current site right now. You need someone that's pretty savvy with programming.
Yeah.
So when we moved from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, we hired Inigo, and it probably took him 8 weeks or so to do the migration, and it wasn't complete, but it got the bulk of it in there. So that's a migration activity, and there was coding they had to do along the way. But I think the initial model, when we were all doing Drupal 6 and then the beginning of DEIMS 7, when Inigo and Marshall were actively involved, it was really helpful to have them sort of be front and center, dealing with some of the things, coding or other things that could be leveraged across the other LTR DEIMS sites that needed some help. It wasn't like each site wanted a one-off solution just for them. Anything that was developed could be leveraged across the other sites and was very valuable. So for me, the ideal model for DEIMS would be able to have someone that can do some of that coding that can be leveraged across all the sites so that each site doesn't have to develop it independently.
Right.
Since Inigo's left, Jim's done an amazing amount of different things, shared it with the group in his own way, but he doesn't have the experience of everything that perhaps an Inigo type that was more familiar with it would. So, but you sort of stumble and do some coding as you can at this point right now. So.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of how pasta would be if we didn't have Mark and Dwayne sort of around to fix things that crop up. Now, I know that there were Dave Blankman and the folks in Europe, ILTER, were also interested in DEIMS. I'm just wondering whether there's sort of a large enough group to pull together to put together some sort of a funding model to actually support it. Anyway, that's just sort of a thought there. But.
Yeah, and I know as a GitHub project, it hasn't had much development. All of them have either been Inigo or I've added a couple of things. But
my impression with the international group that's using DEIMS, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe they have data in there.
That's correct. Yes.
So that's kind of a critical aspect for us that we're doing with EML and whatnot. That's very different from what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. There's a few minutes. Corinna, would you show the Data Explorer?
Sure, I can do that. Here we go. Sorry, I had to find what I was going to share. Can you see my website, my data catalog?
Yes.
Okay. So you've just seen this, pretty much the same thing, and Jim and Hap's website. I haven't done these separate catalogs. I've got our NTL categories right here. So same idea as you saw before. And I was going to show you what, hang on, I can't get to my, so I'm going to use one of our main data sets. So if I go to that, you now see what you've seen before from Jim. That's my data set landing page. And then now you see down here, that you can either download the data as CSV or you can query the database. And that is what Kristen wanted me to show. So if I click on query the database, then this Data Explorer reads the metadata and displays this kind of form where I can pick the columns from within the data set. That's all of this in the beginning. And then I can also put in filter criteria. So I can here, because we have 11 lakes, I can pick one of them. And I can also pick the year that I want. And then if I do a web preview, then I'm getting the data, or I can download them as a CSV file. And so this now subsets a database that we have in our database system, which is running in the same MySQL server as the DEIMS website itself. So this is a module. It's called DEIMS Data Explorer, and we obviously have it turned on. And then there is a little bit of setup required to determine the database connection. And I think that is done in that sites.local.phd file, which is sort of on the base level in the Drupal installation. And what that looks like, again, you see something that Jim and Hap already showed you. This is the data source here. And here's my CSV file. And here is my connection to the remote data source. So my connection is called DBMaker, which is the database where I have my data in. And then Campus is the table that I want to query. And then here in the variables, now I have the choice to tell it which one to use for a filter. So I need to expose this variable to just show it, and then I can also say allow users to filter on this variable. So this was one of the features that was extremely important to me. I did not want another just database query interface where people could query on anything. I wanted to predetermine the columns that people can query on, otherwise it gets way too complicated and most people probably would get lost. And most people, all they want, at least on our site, it's the lake, sometimes the depth, frequently the year that things have been sampled. But for instance, to query on I don't know, like O2 concentration in the water doesn't make any sense. And so I wouldn't even allow that for them to do. And so that's the Data Explorer. That's how that works.
So Corinna, do you think you could recommend DEIMS to new information managers in the LTER?
Yeah, I was going to say that earlier when John asked how much it really is to set this up. There is a huge difference between sites that come with a boatload of data and sites that start out. So if you start out and you are starting to put in like your people and the early publications and then the first data set and your research sites, that is pretty simple and straightforward, and it doesn't take a whole lot of programming knowledge. It does take a little bit of Drupal knowledge. So a student worker who's interested in figuring Drupal out is probably good enough. And then, so where it gets a little complicated is if you want this nice layout, like this beautiful map that Jim had, that takes a little more digging into Drupal. But basically out of the box and with your first data set and the first handful of people and research sites, I think it's pretty straightforward to do.
I agree with that.
You probably want somebody who knows how to install Drupal and somebody who knows how to turn on and off modules and kind of show you where to go and what to do. And then as soon as you get into any kind of layout problems or any kind of fancy layout ideas, that's when you need help probably, or I need help anyways. Since I can't do graphic design to start with, I can't even turn it into Drupal. But Drupal comes with themes, and I mean, I just redesigned our website, so we put in this slider, and then people want to this new sort of approach that you don't have any real pull downs anymore, but these kind of 3 choices down here, and all of that went all straight into the Drupal theme that we had. I didn't have to do much design at all, other than finding these photos, which is hard enough. But no, I think it is pretty easy and straightforward. There are all alternatives now out there, but I think Drupal works pretty well.
Yeah.
What I do see problematic, John, for you is when you do come with a boatload of data, and if you have all your metadata in a certain format, then you have to parse that into the Drupal format, and that is not easy. That was the part that Hap mentioned that took Inigo 8 weeks, and that's probably what, well, it took me a whole lot longer here.
All right, thanks. Well, we're just about at the hour mark, so are there any last little questions for Jim, Hap, Corinna?
I have a question,
Suzanne?
Kristen.
Yeah.
I was wondering what EDI's perspective is on DEIMS, and are they willing to support the development, or what the discussion there is?
Corinna, would you like to tackle that?
Yeah, tackle is sort of the right word. We do not have the kind of funding that originally went into developing DEIMS. We cannot do that kind of programming in EDI. That is just not part of the deal. And we do need to serve a fairly large community, 8 of which are using DEIMS, which is a very small percentage. So I think our goal goes more towards developing workflows to write EML files in R, upload them to Pasta, and then use the Pasta interface to display a data catalog on your local website. That's the kind of disconnected or distributed approach we can support. As you heard, getting data into the DEIMS getting existing data into the DEIMS website is a major undertaking.
So it seems like DEIMS is good for sort of well-developed programs like LTER, but for programs like OFSB and these other ones that just don't have sort of the continuity in information management or whatever. So you wouldn't be recommending it to those IMs?
No, I wouldn't, because as I said, we just can't support this kind of monumental, all-in-one, all-encompassing application. I mean, you've got one of those. You know what it takes to maintain yours. And so that is just not EDI's mission to do that. And Pasta really provides a very nice interface to query the data. So pretty much everything we showed you that can be done in DEIMS can now also be pulled out of Pasta. So you can pull out the data sets for each person. You can pull out the data sets for a certain keyword, just like we showed you here. And that's the part that we need to concentrate on.
So then the next question is to the DEIMS group. What's the future? What are you guys, what's your sort of path forward?
Well, for me, I've always sort of felt that the display and exploration or searching for data should be more centralized. We shouldn't have each site have to develop that and spend a lot of, I spend a lot of time doing that, and I don't have time then to do really data curating. I have boxes back here that I need to go through and pull up data. Yeah. So I'd rather have a front end that tells the site story, but the data, in the future, I'd rather have the data catalog, the other searching, everything be more centralized. And to be truthful, we're also getting this where we have projects that use the LTER Arctic data site plots, experiments, but are funded by different agencies, and those agencies are requiring their data in different databases now, or data portals. They're hitting up PIs when they put their final reports in. Is your data set in the Arctic Data Center? Even though they're really should be in the Arctic or the LTR. So that's one thing, and the other thing is there's a lot of students and stuff that go not through our site, but they go through Data One or through the Arctic LTR portal. So why should I develop a whiz-bang one here that people don't ever come to? I'd rather have push to have a whiz-bang great site in a central area and just have our front end as telling our story and being able to pull the data catalog from a central spot.
You would still have it, your DEIMS as your metadata editor.
At this point, yes. I had my Excel template, which could also produce EML. It had produced EML before DEIMS. It still can produce EML. It's messy, as anything you develop and keep adding on to and figuring out what's wrong and fixing. So it's not something I would just give it to someone because it's too messy.
Yeah, I think we have to get to the point where we consider the data repositories just like journals. People will pick the one that they feel their data are best suited, or the data repository has the best services or whatever. And we may end up having to pull together data sets from many different repositories into, if we want a data catalog for one LTER site, just like Jim said. Because people can also submit to Dryad.
So I'm kind of curious. So with the DEIMS, it's difficult getting everything into DEIMS if you have to put a lot of data in there. So how is EDI? What's the approach that EDI is taking with, say, some of the LTREB sites or the OBFS sites that do have a lot of data that need to go somewhere? Is this R script something that is fairly simple that someone can just crank that out with a whole bunch of data and then submit it to the data portal and it goes in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So the EML assembly line that Colin has been working on is getting better by the minute and faster and easier to use. And yeah, then you don't subscribe to a huge big system that needs to be maintained.
Okay. And then my next thing is sort of the bigger picture with everything, and we're probably already there. It seems like, so we have a variety of these different data repositories that are out there, and Data One seems to be the one place to go to search for all that data everywhere, pulling it from whatever repository it needs to. And that will be the model going forward. So the search and discovery isn't necessarily going to be, you could do it at EDI, at the EDI portal if you need to, but the main one would be at Data One. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. I wouldn't call it the main one, but it's the one that would pull in more data. So as Jim pointed out, a lot of the Arctic data have to go into the Arctic Data Center. And then in Data One, you would find both. So
right. So
EDI repository and the Arctic repository data. Mm-hmm.
So from a one-stop shopping point of view of a researcher that wants to find data, I don't want to have to go to EDI and then go to the Arctic data portal to find stuff. I'm going to go to Data One because presumably it can pull everything together that I have an interest in.
Yes. The downside of that is that it pulls in a lot.
Well, there should be some way of culling it down to what you actually would need.
Well, we're still working on that.
All right, well, that's a critical feature then, right?
Nobody has found that silver bullet yet on how to read your mind on what you really want.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for your interest.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.